welcome to Downtime Activities. My name's Matthew, and today I'm going to go over something that I think could help out in a lot of combats and encounters for anyone out there playing 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, or really any RPG at all, and that is Transitional Combats. Let's take a look at just what that means. Alright, let's talk about Transitional Combat in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, or really in any RPG setting you can use these rules. We're going to kind of frame it with 5e for this though. I think it's an awesome way to make combat in your games more interesting and exciting, and will really add a lot of variety and spice to those encounters. The basic concept of this is combat that will happen in stages or evolves throughout an encounter to implement new enemies, changes to the existing enemies, new environmental effects, or even a new location altogether. Let's kind of break it down with each of those categories and give some examples and ideas behind that. To start with, let's talk incorporating new enemies. Typically this is going to be incorporating adds or additional non-boss level enemies, to put it in video game terms, throughout a combat. This can be something where you add additional enemies every couple of rounds until the boss is killed, or maybe you add them due to an action of an existing enemy or boss on the battlefield, that a certain number of rounds after they call for help, a group will come and try and save them, and the party has that amount of time to try and kill them before those helpers arrive. This same concept could also be applied in reverse, and have it so that while the party is fighting lower level enemies, there is a higher level enemy that is on their way or has the potential of arriving. Things like a group of cultists summoning some big bad evil demon, and if they don't stop them in time, that demon's going to show up and it's going to be a much harder fight at that point. I feel like that's the most straightforward of these options. Moving on, another one that's kind of cool, can be a little bit video gamey, but still very cool, is having changes happen to the enemies they're already fighting at some point during the combat. That kind of classic, this isn't even my final form moment, can have a big impact and make a combat very interesting. Things like monsters' stats, abilities, or even just their tactics could change as combat progresses, and this transition will make the party have to adjust their tactics and adjust the way they try and take this boss down. An example of this is an enemy that transforms into a more powerful but maybe more out of control form when they get near death. Some sort of mutagen that flows through their veins and turns them into a raging monster. Or maybe there's an enemy in some sort of suit or contraption that, once the party deals enough damage to it, it gets destroyed and that forces them out to fight mano-a-mano. Another option would be an enemy that just adjusts its tactics to preserve itself when on low hit points. For instance, a dragon that maybe was clawing and biting gets below half and decides, I'd rather be flying and just trying to use my breath weapon now, these guys mean business. Next up, let's talk environmental effects and how you can have those transition throughout combat. Environmental effects are going to be surrounding effects that are not directly related to the monster or monsters being fought. They're going to alter the way that combat goes. There's a lot of options here. I'm just going to spitball a couple of ideas, but there's a lot of ways you could take this. One is quite literal environmental effects in terms of weather effects like a worsening storm or an incoming avalanche that will have effects and saving throws and things along those lines associated with them that will force combat to either need to be resolved quick enough to avoid or to fundamentally change as these effects start taking place. Another option here would be a magical device in the center of the room that has random effects on the battlefield and the creatures on it, and it could build in power throughout the combat until the device is destroyed or deactivated, either by damage or maybe skill checks. Something along those lines, while not necessary to deactivate, could make the combat a lot easier if these effects are hampering the party's attempt at winning this fight, and makes them kind of divide their attention between stopping that device and fighting this enemy that's ahead of them. Another cool way to do this is to kind of combine it with having the transition of enemies and have the enemies themselves take some sort of action that affects the map or a piece of it, and that interaction will cause the whole layout of the map to change. A good example of this is like knocking a dam loose or breaking away a piece of rubble that causes a big landslide on a cliff. Things like this where the enemy is interacting with the map, fundamentally changing things, and transitioning the combat and the map that it's being fought on to be different and have new effects that the players now have to interact with and overcome. And the last of these options that I mentioned earlier is a new location, and this is one of the trickier options, but a really fun one that is especially cool during kind of large set-piece boss-style combats. A good way to do this, especially with a boss-level monster, is to choose one that has a creative or kind of weird, unique movement type or way of getting around the map. Things like flying, burrowing, teleporting, and using that for the enemy to literally move from that map to a different one. And then the party has to kind of pick up their pieces and follow it. They maybe have a moment to catch their breath, or maybe they don't, and they just have to chase right after this thing. That decision can affect how much time in this new location that enemy has to maybe drink potions or cast spells on themselves. You keep an initiative for this, at least I would, so that each round matters and the party feels that pressure. Another way of doing this would be to have part or all of the map that they're fighting on to break away and fall out from underneath them, causing the combat to fall to a new lower level of the dungeon or cave or castle or wherever they're fighting. Another cool thing you could do is have some sort of mass magical teleportation effect that will teleport the players and the enemies to a new location or even plane of existence. This is where they'd have to finish the fight in this new and fundamentally different place that has different things going on inside of it, and therefore different things for the players to interact with and overcome. And a last little fun one to throw out here, a fun thing you can do, especially appropriate for certain mind-altering monsters or magical users, is to have a sort of dream sequence start partway through a combat, where the party gets sent to some dream world where they have to now fight a different fight that frees their consciousness and allows them to get back to the real world and the real fight to finish it. In closing, Transitional Combat will add a lot of variety and excitement to encounters, and while it's not necessary to use in every single combat that you run, you really should use it regularly, and especially in bigger and more important combats. Another note here, combining multiple aspects of Transitional Combat, things like having the map fall through going to a new location and having the boss have some sort of change where it changes up its tactics in this new place, combine to make really cool and really interesting encounters. So play around with it. Take multiple different aspects of this and slam them together to make really dynamic and transitioning combats where the players never quite know what's going to happen next. That has been Transitional Combats. I hope you find this information useful or interesting. If you do, please feel free to give the video a like. If you're interested in other RPG content, please check out the rest of the channel. Specifically for 5th edition, we have series going over kind of deep rules and breaking stuff down about those in our Help Action series. We have more casual kind of podcast-style conversations in our bonus action series, as well as a multitude of gameplay and character builds. So please check it out. Now go forth, slay dragons, sling spells, roll dice, and enjoy your downtime activities.